so shit at this bit.
You're not. Great shirt.
Oh, it is good, isn't it? Welcome to Welsh Wednesdays with me, Kate Gill-Williams, and
me, Kiri Pritchard-McLean.
So every week we catch up, have a sgwrs, and pick a different subject, and then at the end try and talk about it in Welsh.
So it's your episode, and we're going to be talking about the iconic film Twin Town.
Yes, Twin Town. 1997 it was filmed, wasn't it? So what's that, 24 years old?
Yes.
Gosh, I started school in 97, so that makes me feel a bit old. But yeah, it's a really iconic film, quite pioneering, because I think it was the first of its type that came out of Wales and represented Welsh culture. But it was also made at a time when that sort of niche, more indie, little bit 90s kind of train spotting vibe and the music of the 90s. So it kind of came out of all of that boom, really.
The interesting things about it in a filmic way is the two protagonists are deeply unlikable. Like they have no redeeming qualities at all. Everyone is horrible. It's almost like a western that plays out in Wales. So it's basically sort of like a revenge film, and it's quite a complicated, fast-moving plot as well, and it's relentlessly dark, and there's just no one in it you think is a nice person, which is amazing that it's so watchable.
The director, Kevin Allen, he's Keith Allen's brother, so Lily Allen's dad.
Okay.
So he's the director, but he uses loads of his family in different scenes. So at the beginning, there's a scene where there's a load of Welsh women in the taxi. I think it's his mum and his aunties. I quite like that idea that he's just been like, yeah, come on, let's just go and make a film together. There's a scene in it's like a massage parlour. I'm sure his uncle is the guy who gets how does she describe it now?
Hand relief, I believe.
It's a ham shandy?
Ham shandy. Well, I think doesn't she say hand relief? But I would say hand shandy, yeah.
I think she says, I think she does say tits and hand shandy. Oh my God. I sound like I've never had sex.
Was obviously got some icons in there, in that, like Rhys Ifans and his brother as well. Rhys Ifans is obviously like Hollywood famous now, but they're both brilliant in it, and they work so well together in a way that I guess only siblings can.
They did an interview about it, and I think this is when it had been launched in America. The journalist is trying to be really high tit about all of it and is kind of going, so what does it imply? What does it mean? And they're literally just going, it's just a comedy. It's just a comedy. But Twin Town, I think, is a social commentary more than a comedy. I think it's a perfect representation of its time. But there were politicians. There was Tory MP, and she called for it for it to be banned, because she said it would incite young people to go and basically get a load of ASBOs or behavioural things. And Rhys Ifans is saying in the interview, actually, that ship has sailed. It's Tory rule that's made young people who are bored, and yet they just don't want to take any accountability for it. Well, they want to blame filmmakers who are creating these films to, incite young boys to go out and commit crimes, but actually they're speaking to them. And maybe that's the thing that'll save them, a film like Twin Town, because they can see the characters in there and be like, well, that's how I feel. That's what me and my mates do. And they can recognise themselves within it.
They're not stupid. Like, they show initiative and they show like creativity, but they do it in committing crimes. They've obviously got great minds, and they're always challenging each other to do like drug stuff. And that to me is just like understimulated minds. It's not about look how reckless boys can be if we get rid of national service or whatever that Tory MP was arguing. It was like, look at these brilliant yet understimulated minds.
But I think what it does capture really well is the realness of, so even like there's a scene where they're having sex in the caravan, and it's so real. Like even the lights, they've not even put a nice soft light on. They're just banging in this like bright, stark, bleak light. And I'm like, well, yeah, sometimes you just get on with it like that. Like it's not all candles and, soft lighting.
No one's making love in that film. Like everyone's just banging. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It reminded me almost of something like Sin City. It feels like I'm watching a comic book play out. There's a bit where a guy is urinating into urinal singing she loves me not, and he's farting sort of as he's doing it. It's really gross. And then the window above the urinals just opens, one of the twins comes through it legs first, and then immediately afterwards the taller twin comes through it like legs first, and they just do it so casually and walk past him. But it is like something from a comic book. There's a surrealness to it that I just think is really like, well, it's really bold. There's a fun Welshness to it. There's Welsh languages spoken in it. I think the grandma is a Welsh speaker, so always speaks to the dog in Welsh, which is a common thing in my family. Is my dad is convinced that animals speak Welsh, so he always speaks Welsh to animals. It's kind of a cool film. It's almost in that cool Cymru bit as well with the music, where it felt like Wales was sort of being a bit punky in its own way, being like, yeah, we got our own language, we got our own music, we got these kind of films. I think it's cool. Yeah, I think cool.
Say Twin Town's set in Abertawe, Swansea, but I think it's actually filmed in Port Talbot. I think it captured Abertawe quite well.
Swansea is a really pretty town to wander around in the day. You know, there's a castle ruin there, and you know, there's a cute little high street, and then it feels like it can get a bit wild at night. But one of the first times I met Ellis James was at a gig, and he'd been in Carnarvon in the day, and he was like, Carnarvon he's like, it's one of those places you walk around in the daylight and you're like, what a town, look at Carnarvon. And he's like, and then the lights go out and you're like, oh no, we've got to get out of here.
There's a reference to Dylan Thomas because he was born there, wasn't he? So I think he said Swansea is the graveyard of ambition.
Yeah.
So scathing, isn't it? I think they're trying to represent it in its bleakness, but I wonder if people who are from there are like, it's not like that really, or...
I bet the council were like, oh, that's nothing to, like, Swansea's nothing like that. And actually it was filmed in Port Talbot, if you must know. It can also be a snapshot of an era, but not define a place. It could be, like, you're right, it could be about Widnes, it could be about Bangor, it could be about a million places. They're just sort of places that Thatcher would have put into managed decline. It feels like so many of those places, and so many of those sort of like, you know, generation of young lads who mass unemployment and, you know, school wasn't appealing to them, and they just sort of go and get wrecked to just numb it all, and because they're bored. And I think that rings true wherever you are, and it's not necessarily an indictment on Swansea, as it more is an indictment on just the legacy of the 80s, I guess.
There's a synergy with Northerners and industrial towns that I think will relate to it a lot more. Maybe it's more about what happens when people with ambition who want to achieve more, what happens when they're stifled and just stuck in a situation. Where does that creative energy go? They're right, they're forgotten about, aren't they? This town, it is a hangover of the 80s. That is a Thatcher legacy.
I watched Twin Town back today. The music is so integral, like it's so, the soundtrack tells the story, and that was definitely a popular genre at the time, especially in British film. Do you remember this one that sticks out in my head? It was basically a porno for people who read The Enemy. Was it called 9 Songs? Did you ever see that?
Yeah, I did see 9 Songs because there was real sex in it, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was just like people banging while like Black Rebel Motorcycle Club played in the background. That was the film.
I remember it vividly. You know the Petula Clark song Downtown? After watching Twin Town, I think I must have watched it maybe early noughties, and that song really frightened me for a little bit afterwards. There was something about it that just jarred because it seems like it's so uplifting, but it captures the bleakness.
I think you're right, and it's meant to be scary because they have a montage beforehand which is a perfect snapshot of those post-industrial towns all over the UK on a night out where things get just a bit tasty.
It's basically the moment when you're looking for the toilets and I don't know, it just encompasses all of that kind of sticky carpet, someone's getting fingered, like, but you're aware of it, but you're not.
It's a few drinks, so, you know, people are cheating on each other, you know, like girls haven't got any shoes on, there's chips everywhere, and it all just feels like it can kick off at any moment. But also that's like all you're living for. Like I remember when I was growing up around here, I was working about 70-hour weeks as a chef, and I would have one day off, and it would be Tuesdays because I'd do Monday night time, because that was like the student night in Amsterdam, the nightclub, and it meant that I could be hungover the next day. So I didn't take holidays, and you know, I would go straight back to uni because the job paid for uni. So like I had to make all this money to go and pay for myself to go to uni. And so it was all this thing of just like having one night of release to like get off with the one indie boy around here. And you know, like just I know that feeling of like living for that day of just getting absolutely trashed, dealing with a hangover, and hopefully being in like, and then back to work again. I know that feeling.
I would live for those nights that you've described, but I'd also be really frightened of them, because a good night to me is like an appreciation of really good music, watching a band, and basically just a really moderate evening where you're just pissed enough and you go home sensibly, which is really fucking boring. Maybe that's because I've got 2 kids. I don't know. My thing with Twin Town is that I feel like it's a bit of a glamorization of working class. It feels like working class culture became a bit of a niche, a bit of a commodity, and everyone in the late 90s, because of Oasis and things like that, wanted to just be this working class type of people. So a lot of people who definitely weren't working class would be like, yeah, I grew up on the mean streets of Manchester or something.
I think people misconstrue, for a start, the middle class is so broad in terms of like lower middle class gets lumped in the same as people like Boris Johnson. Loads of people, especially under Tony Blair as well, his whole thing was to swell the middle classes. So loads of people had sort of upward social mobility. And then at that time, it's always been like the working class has been fetishized and meant different things to different people. Ken Loach films are always like mythologizing and like, you know, and you know, I'm not, obviously he's absolutely amazing, but like, you know, the bleakness and the harshness and the poetry that does exist, but like that is not exclusively all working class people. Some of them can be pieces of shit as well. As someone who was bullied an awful lot by them in school, sometimes I know what you mean. There could be no room for nuance in terms of it. And yes, it was definitely part of an era that was sort of about sort of making heroes, especially out of sort of dysfunctional working class men like the Gallaghers. Because also I think what it was is a reaction to people being surprised that these people had wit and charm and swagger. And that was something that was associated with people with money. And yet like the Gallaghers came from the, you know, Burnage, where there's like no money. You got all these sort of like descendant of Irish immigrant boys who were just like ruling the world, being really funny, really cocky, really rude, doing it all on their own terms. And prior to that, a lot of it had been Morrissey and things like that, and even Sex Pistols felt like it was coming from quite a middle class place. But with the Gallaghers, you're right, it felt like it was being, history is being rewritten a bit, and then yeah, it being reflected in film. Is your sgwrs?
Gymraeg, yes.
Felly, dwi'n wrth fy modd efo ffilmiau a storiau lle pawb ydi ofnadwy a prif person neu dim caridor, what persons?
Personau ydy.
Ie, dwi'n meddwl, ie. Personau, neu personau, ydy afiach. A dwi'n meddwl pawb yn y ffilm ydy wallgof. A dwi'n meddwl Twin Town ydy bwysig i tynnu liw o yr adael, dim adael, o amser yn hanes, efo post-industrial dre neu dinas efo llawer o unwaith. Is that unemployment? Ungwaith?
Dim gwaith ella, ddim yn sure, so no work. Yeah, dwi'n deall. Dwi'n gwybod geir.
Yeah, efo bangin can. So I didn't even time it. I don't know how long that's been, but it feels about a minute.
You love the film because it's great to see a film where no characters are nice.
Yeah.
The main characters are afiach, awful. And it takes a picture, clean, of the time and the history. Be arall, Kiri? Be arall nes ti deud?
I think that was it. And then I just sort of said, yeah, it takes a picture of the towns and the cities at that time. Yeah.
That's it. Dre a dinas.
Dinas, yeah. Efo bangin' can.
Bangin' can. Cyddoriaeth yn anhygoel, tydi. Mae Twin Town yn comedi tywyll amdan twins pwy sy'n byw yn Abertawe. A mae nhw yn pobl ifanc heb dim ambitions, heb opportunities, cyfle ydy opportunity dwi'n meddwl.
Chance, yeah?
Yeah, cyfle?
I think cyfle is chance.
Yeah, cyfle.
That works.
Yeah, chance, dim chance. A mae nhw'n trio i ffindio arian a llawer o ladron stil, ladron pa. Gosh, ddim yn make sense hyn yma. Be'r arall, dwi'n cytuno efo ti, mae characters ddim yn cael redeeming features o gwbl. A roedd Abertawe yn edrych fel dre fel dros y UK. Wel, dim Llundain, ella. Ach, dwi'n really hoffi ffilm, ond ar un amser ddim yn hoffi fo. Mae'n teimlo bleak. Ach, tywyll.
A dipyn o trist.
Drist? Drist. Mae'n anodd i wneud drist achos ti ddim yn invested yn y pobl yn y ffilm. So dwi ddim yn siŵr pwy ydw i'n teimlo drist amdan. Ti'n gwybod?
Okay, yeah. Ar yn y gorffen, at the end, not efo y côr, mae'n hardd iawn a mae'n cymaint hardd a dechrau it starts to become trist. Like when something is so beautiful it almost becomes sad. That's what I feel like about for the end.
Dwi'n meddwl diwedd neu gorffen? I don't know which one's end or mae yn poetic and maybe dipyn bach a nod I Dylan Thomas.
Yeah, yeah. So you said Twin Town is a dark comedy set in Swansea about two brothers without money or opportunities, and then it's about them without jobs and opportunities, and then it's about them trying to get money and things like that. And then I can't remember the next bit, and then you said you agreed with me, and I definitely remember that.
Who's signing out?
I'll sign out if you want. So that was Twin Town. We hope you're enjoying Welsh Wednesdays. We've had loads of really nice messages about it, about people who have found the episodes interesting, or maybe it's helping with you learning Welsh. I would say don't follow my example, but we're really glad that you're enjoying it. And if you've got any suggestions for a subject you think we should talk about, then yeah, just get in contact with us, and we'll see you in a week. Bye.
Bye, hwyl pawb.